Hello and welcome to the 18th episode of the KurosawaCast. I am your host, Rob Beams, a Kurosawa fanboy who's seen all of the films many, many times and is a big fan of them. High and Low, the one we talk about this time being arguably my favourite. And I'm joined as ever by Craig Ennis, film teacher and filmmaker, who's approaching these Kurosawa films in chronological order for the first time, completely fresh. So with that introduction, Craig, how are you today?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. It's a little bit cold and miserable for a late May Saturday afternoon, if I'm honest. We've got a lot of weather here right at the moment, and it's really quite depressing outside.
Well, I guess this is sort of diving right into the meat of the matter. Did High and Low do anything to alleviate your weather-based blues?
It transported me to a much more a much more clement mid-60s Japanese seaside summer. Yeah, it really did. I've watched. Usually when we record these, we've watched them in the week running up and had a little time. Today I finished High and Low about an hour ago or so. So yeah, it's really quite fresh in my mind.
With that said, I watched it again last night. I must have seen it. I think that's my third or fourth time watching it. But with it being even fresher in your mind, maybe you could give a quick summary of the broad sweep of it. It's not a complicated one to explain, really, is it? It's pretty simple.
It is pretty simple. I mean, there are some. It starts with some machinations about a shoe factory, which are more interesting than that sounds. A lot of people saying about their exact role at the shoe factory and what their vision for the shoe factory is. And there's this kind of this corporate kind of, not espionage, but this corporate kind of Machiavellian machinations kind of bubbling, and Mifune's involved in this, but what's his name? Is it Kondo?
Which guy? He's called Kingo Gondo, which is one of the best character names I've ever heard.
Yeah, Gondo, who has his own ideas about taking over the factory on his own back, and he's staking all his money on it.
He wants to reduce the profit margins, but he wants to make a more durable ladies' shoe.
Yes, basically. Yeah, he's it's all about the quality of the shoe. And he goes home and kind of explains all this. And his son is playing with the son of his chauffeur, and they're running around pretending to shoot each other. And he gets a phone call saying that his son's been kidnapped. And it turns out the kidnapper accidentally kidnaps the chauffeur's son and demands a 30 million yen ransom for the son. And so you've got a film of two halves, which it seems to be a recurring theme. One is this kind of chamber piece almost in Gondo's front room, where they are negotiating with the kidnapper, and Gondo's kind of wrestling with the moral implications of whether or not he can pay the ransom for because it isn't his son, and he's kind of like, I'll be ruined if I pay it, and that kind of thing. So that goes backwards and forwards in quite a he's taken quite a compelling but quite a stagey kind of way.
It is, and he's taken, just to give some context to that, he faces ruin because although he's this millionaire, he's taken out big loans and like put his house up, like remortgaged his house or whatever to secure these loans for this takeover that he wants to participate in. So if he gives the ransom money up,
he really believes in these high quality shoes, doesn't he?
He does. So you're quite right. That is like the first half, and
then it's a police procedural as they
exactly.
As they go through trying to track down the kidnapper. And it's a police procedural in the best sort of most forensic sense, where they're like analysing phone calls and then realising that there's a tram, and then in the background, and they find the locations where there might be trams nearby, and there's a picture that the kid's drawn of an island, and they're kind of cross-referencing all this information, having these big meetings, and different people are standing up and saying, well, we've been looking at the money, we've been looking at the tram, we've been looking at the island, we've been looking at this.
that debriefing where different units of police stand up and say what their very specific job is, and then talk about exactly what they found out today is just so fun to watch. It's just like all these people just because some of them are really minor as well. Like they're not all like big clues. Some of them are just someone stands up to, yeah, I spoke to the bloke and he didn't see anything. But I'm still looking, and we've got some other leads to follow, and I'll let you know later.
There's definitely
some of them like that.
There's definitely a sense in that meeting scene that some detectives have been working harder than others.
Yes.
And then it follows through to the conclusion and the eventual capture and conviction of the kidnapper. But it's kind of like. It really reminded me of a Soderbergh film. Actually, it's a sort of film it does feel like a Soderbergh film, or the first half maybe felt a bit more maybe like a Richard Linklater bottle film, but definitely those sort of you're in that sort of area, basically.
It's interesting because the film keeps kind of undercutting its own drama, doesn't it? In the sense of like, in a very traditional sense, in that the kidnapping is resolved halfway through. They get the kid back like halfway through the movie. And then quite soon into the police procedural, they find the kidnapper. They find him and they could arrest him, but they keep tracking him because they want to arrest him more. You know, they want to give him they want to give this guy the death penalty, so they want to attach him to more crimes. So they kind of end up they already know kind of where he's going. Like there's almost no suspense to it, and I don't mean that in a bad way, because the police already know where he's going. They already know what he's going to do. They know what he looks like. They know where he works, and we're just watching him go through the motions as they follow him around. And it's somehow really compelling, in spite of the fact that there are almost no stakes at that point.
That's what I kind of mean a little bit like a Soderbergh film, because in those big kind of it's not plateau. I'm trying to think of the word, but in those big kind of macro view films that he does, the Traffics and the Contagions and those sort of things, it's like they're usually quite stripped of melodrama. It's more a case of trying to get an understanding of how these things link together, and that's what this very much feels like. Like I said, there were times I really like The Bad Sleep Well, and there's times when that threatens to jump into melodrama, and it's got like identity swapping and people falling in love and things like that, and it's got that sort of melodrama soapy kind ofness to it a little bit, and this is stripped out of that entirely. It's it's a procedural. It's I mean, I guess the first half is more melodrama-y, but it's more like it's all to do with Gondo's character and whether or not he's going to make the right decision, and everyone else is just sort of sitting around, sort of. They don't plead with him; they just kind of lay the facts out at him and go, "Well, you know, you got to think about this. Come on." Well,
the kidnapped child, the kidnapped child's father, the chauffeur, he does plead with him, but then he comes back in the next day and apologizes and says, "Actually, don't worry about it." Yeah, I'm sure my son will escape. He says, "Yeah, he'll be fine." But just a few notes worth bringing up at this stage. Kyoko Kagawa, who we've seen in a few of the more recent ones, she was the kind of the gimpy bride at the beginning of The Bad Sleep Well, who's sort of kind of a victim figure through the film. She's Mifune's wife in this. You've got Tetsuya Nakadai, who's become increasingly important to Kurosawa's films as they've gone on since sort of Yojimbo, who is the kind of lead detective. We talked a bit last time about how Takashi Shimura at this point has more or less been completely discarded.
I didn't spot him.
He's in it. It's really blink and you miss it, and I think he probably only has a few lines. He is the head of the police in all the briefing scenes. He's like the guy that they're briefing to, and his second in command or his co-commander, whoever it is the No, not him. Not the bald guy. No, not him. When they're in those big briefing rooms, Shimura's always sitting next to. I think his name is Susumu Fujita. I think, which is the guy who played Sanshiro Sugata. So you get these two guys who are really important in Kurosawa's early movies, who have these real bit parts who are just like these two guys who barely say anything in the rooms where there's like 30 people. And you also get Minoru Chiaki, who's had some quite big roles in Kurosawa films. He's one of the journalists in that one scene where there's loads of journalists, and he's got like one line. So there are all these like guys who've been quite important throughout Kurosawa's filmography to this point, who are given these like real like walk-on parts for some reason.
I mean, in fairness, it is a film of walk-on parts, isn't it? Like people do. Aside from a handful of people, there isn't. You're only really with 4 people throughout the whole thing, and then everybody else kind of drops in as the plot requires them. And I mean, aside from the business with Mifune Gondo at the start, everybody's actions are very businesslike throughout the whole thing. It's like it's all functional, isn't it? Like we're gonna catch this person, and then we're gonna make him more arrested than we can already make it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'd really like to get your perspective on this, because when I watch it, my natural assumption to make, and with the idea that Kurosawa is a humanist and all this, is that he does have some sort of sympathy with this other guy, because the film is called High and Low, or the Japanese title is actually Heaven and Hell. And it's very much depicts that this guy lives down in hell, and that he is looking up at this guy with everything up in heaven, and there's this simmering resentment. And with that, and with the fact that at the end he is so scared and he's crying and all of this, he's a pitiable character. And yet in the Donald Ritchie book, it talks about how there's no sympathy with the criminal in this, how it's really very straightforward, good and evil. So I wanted to get your read on that. Like, do you think that there is any social commentary there? Do you think that there's any anything beyond just a simple good and evil in this? Because Ritchie,
I mean, if there is, it's weak. Like the guy's got a small apartment and he can see the house, and that's about the length of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's not even like it's a particularly nasty apartment. You know, it's small, it's functional. He seems to be doing all right.
Well, he's becoming a doctor, isn't he? So
he's becoming a doctor. Yeah, exactly. He'll be fine. He just needs to hunker. We all have to hunker down a bit in our student lives and kind of. He'll do all right for himself eventually. You know, it's all just predicated around the fact that when he looks out of his window, Mifune's house is framed really nicely. And he assumes he's got air conditioning as well. His house is too hot in the summer and too cold in the winter.
Yeah, those are his big bugbears. So you better kidnap a child.
And murder some heroin addicts.
And murder some people. But this is the thing, and I think maybe here I'm giving Kurosawa too much credit, because it's not something that Ritchie seems to point out. Probably. But the bit where the basically, because they decide to arrest him even more because they want to time to more stuff, they get a heroin addict killed, right? They just watch him kill a heroin addict. And when Nakadai gets the news on the police radio that the woman's dead, he literally doesn't even react to it. He just moves on to the next beat. And so there's this thing where they're so sad, like they're so mournful throughout the film of the idea that they've let Mifune down because this millionaire has lost some of his money.
Lost 20,000 yen out of 30 million.
Yeah, and they're so upset about this, and they're so desperate to help him out. And yet,
so are the public at large.
So are the public at large. And yet, this heroin addict dies, and it doesn't even get mentioned. And the fact that the heroin addict dies is literally the fault of the police, right? And so this is the part where maybe I'm giving it too much credit. I almost feel watching it that is part of the commentary, but maybe it's just that Kurosawa also doesn't care about the heroin addict. I don't know.
Quite possibly. I don't know. I mean, it's difficult to say. I mean, in previous films, in your Stray Dogs and your what's the other one? Drunken Angel. We spend time with those people a lot more, whereas we don't really spend any time with any of these characters. There's another great party scene where we meet the victim, and you know. Kurosawa, like, I don't know why, because he seems like in his quotes and everything, he seems like such a bit of an uptight kind of partridgey kind of fella, but he really knows how to film a party to make it look really appealing, and like it's the sort of party you actually want. There's so many American films where you see party scenes and you go, these people look horrible. This looks like a horrible place to be. But Kurosawa knows how to frame and film a knees up, basically. But we don't really spend any time with it. We see her kind of realize that this guy's wrong, and we spend some time with her kind of in her panic and which is unpleasant. But there's no character given to really any of those three characters other than the defining characteristic of them being addicted to opioids.
Yeah, no, that's fair. It's just, it seems to me to be slightly out of character for Kurosawa to have a character die and the police, just the people who are supposedly the heroes, not to even feel slightly bad about it. You know? Like, I expect Nakadai's reaction when he hears it on the police radio to be like, oh no, we've really loused up this time, guys. But he just doesn't give a fuck. And there is such almost melodramatic worry about Mifune's money. Like when they see just how noble this man is, willing to sacrifice this money for this thing, they are so like, there are several times Nakadai gives little speeches about how we've got to get this back for him. I admire this guy so much, and all of this. So it does seem kind of like Kurosawa is sometimes accused of being his sympathies being with the upper class because he was kind of upper class stock himself. This does seem to be kind of uncomplicatedly fawning of the Mifune character by the end, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Especially given how long it takes over him to make the decision as well, and that kind of thing. There's a great. I know you always talk about bits of business on this podcast, and I picked up a little bit of business on this one that I really liked. Where it's before he's made the. So they're set up. So they're in a living room. It's on top of a cliff. Big windows all around the place, net curtains and curtains, and they've got the curtains kind of drawn so that the police can kind of operate within the house without the guy seeing them, because they know he can see them through a telescope or through binoculars or whatever. There's a bit where they all have to dive under tables quickly. But later on, there's after one of the phone calls, Mifune's kind of like arguing with the kidnapper in his head, but kind of getting really frustrated, and he's talking, and he's kind of vocalizing his process and his moral process to everybody in the room, and he gets frustrated and he kind of whacks the curtain open just for a sec, and then kind of hesitates and like pulls it back again. It's really nice little just bit of physical kind of manifestation of what's going on in his head. I thought that was really good.
Yeah, there are lots of really nice little moments in this one. One of the things I really like, which is less kind of a bit of business and more, I guess, a technique thing or a visual motifs thing, is that the film is full of reflections. There are so many times that you'll see, like in the climactic scene, you get Mifune's face reflected as he talks to the criminal behind glass. So you see both of their faces at the same time. But you also see, like, one of the best shots probably throughout all of Kurosawa is when the criminal emerges from the bushes and he sees the house reflected in his sunglasses. And there are lots of scenes where when he's kind of going after the addict in the alleyways, you get some really great shots of her reflected in his sunglasses. Then there are lots of times where there's focus on, obviously with I can't really make any great claims for this, like I don't know what it like means, but in the film there's so much emphasis on taking photos, on looking through telescopes, on looking out the windows, that it is very much a film of gazes. It is a film of looking. There are all these just things about people watching other people. Now, I'm sure Mark Cousins could could make a lot of hay with that more than I could, but it's definitely something that runs through the film. It's definitely a kind of a motif of watching and looking, and of lenses and of windows and of reflections.
It certainly feels like something you should say about a good film, doesn't it?
One of the great films about looking. Kurosawa's High and Low. So I want to dive into the really meaty stuff here, the really arbitrary meaty stuff, which is just like, obviously I've What the shoe
We're
production?
talking shoe
Yeah,
production.
obviously, the shoe production is the fact that obviously you went into this. You've not had expectations for most of them to some extent because a lot of them have been completely new to you and you've got in blind. But you've known from the beginning this is like possibly my favorite one, and has very much become the kind of Barry Lyndon or Jackie Brown of his filmography, where it's the kind of one that people will say that's their favorite if they're asked to, so that they're not so basic. And so, like, you've come to this maybe with a little bit of baggage in that respect. So I wanted to know, like, how it stacked up for you, whether it fell under any expectations you had, what your kind of overall sort of feeling on it was. I saw you gave it a 4.5 on Letterboxd, so I know it's not reached the pinnacle.
No, well, you know, that's only because I don't tend to give anything 5 unless I've kind of it sat with me for a while and I rewatch it. Things get a 5 on a rewatch generally. Few things have sneaked past that recently, like a matter of Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, and
well, you gave Seven Samurai and Rashomon 5s.
Yeah. I gave a few things, but they are few and far between. Well, in terms of like it being, you know, the hipster's choice, I didn't really have too much baggage about that because, you know, people can say what their favorite is and that's fine, or what the best one is. I was expecting it to be good, but I wasn't going to rub up against that necessarily. You know, that's because even the thing is, when people say Barry Lyndon or they say 2001 or they say Barry Lyndon or they say Jackie Brown or
Spy Kids 3D, you know, Rodriguez's best film.
The thing about it is they're always right that they are good films, you know.
Yeah,
it's you're just suspicious about whether or not they like them, if they like
them as much as they're saying. Yeah.
You know,
so a good point of comparison then is that you didn't have any expectations really about Bad Sleep Well, and that was like a complete like hidden gem sort of thing for you.
I love that.
And being that it was only a couple of years before this, it's also widescreen, it's also in a modern setting, it's that late 50s, it's that early 60s sort of late 50s thing. It's very comparable. It's also of a similar sort of length. It's also got some similar overlap in that it's a crime film in a way. So how does it compare to Bad Sleep Well for you?
Put it this way, I'm disappointed that there's no more of these coming. Like, there's only a couple of them. These have been my favorite. These have been the favorite one. These have been my favorite. That sort of
noirish
has been my favorite blend of Kurosawa that we've had, and it's a bit like I don't know what it is. I love Seven Samurai, and I thought Rashomon was really interesting and really compelling. But like, as we saw in the last couple of weeks, I wasn't that keen on I liked them, but I wasn't super keen on the Jimbo and Sanjuro films. I don't know what it is. I think it's something about the sort of the contemporaneous nature of the films that I kind of like and respond to. It's similar with like Studio Ghibli films. My favorite Studio Ghibli films are From Up on Poppy Hill and Grave of the Fireflies and The Wind Rises, and the ones that are set in a recognizably real world, or a world that I can feel more
invested in.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and I think the time difference and the kind of the cultural difference and the kind of the hierarchical code being something that I'm not aware of in those samurai films kind of just removes me from them one step further, because I didn't spend a lot of time in 1960s Japan either, but but yeah. So I really like it when he does these films. I really like these two and Stray Dog. I've really enjoyed them, and this was just gripping from start to end, I thought. Yeah, If any, there aren't many 2 hour and 20-minute films that could do with losing 20 minutes. I don't think this is an exception. But I don't know where you'd take it from. It would be more of a case of editing within scenes. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't feel like there's a part you would take out wholesale. Maybe.
Well, it's difficult because the procedural stuff is all killer, no filler.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, and the stuff in the first half in Mifune's house is really nice with the way it uses time, because it's basically, I mean, Ritchie points out in his book actually that first half where it's like a kind of bottle movie, as you say, sort of just in Mifune's flat, there are only 3 breaks where time moves along. Most of it's just these continued scenes playing out, and there's always something really engrossing about things that are just happening like in real time, isn't there, where they're just kind of unfolding, like from the moment the executives kind of are in his house right the way up until maybe even the police arriving or something. It all feels it's just him in his apartment going through the motions, going through everything bit by bit. At first it's all about that business deal, changes to be about the kidnapping, then it's about talking to the police, and you get one of the first cuts for time is so elegant. Like, it really impressed me. Was it's nothing, I'm sure you've seen it in other films, but I just thought it was really economical, is when he's having a conversation with the guy with the kidnapper on the phone and the police are listening in. We get a cut then just to them listening to the recording, because that's the time when they can all listen together at the same time and we can hear what everyone's saying and they can all talk to each other. And it's so economical to do it that way, to have it be like, okay, we're going to hear this conversation, but let's do it 20 minutes later when everyone can listen in. And I thought that was really smoothly done. And that's one of the first times I think the movie actually jumps on in time, and it's got such an economy to it. It's also pointed out in the Ritchie book, which is something I never would have noticed myself or have any reason to know myself, but the train journey is completely real time, to the point where the 4 minutes or whatever between the stations is in real time, and it's the actual distance between these stations. Like, it just is a real time train journey, which I absolutely love, because I love I think we talked before on this podcast and previously about there's always something really kinetic about anything in a film that's taking place on a journey, in a car, on a train. And so even though you play that out in like real time over the course of this little train journey, it's got this feeling of motion, isn't it? Which is just always really appealing, I think.
There's something particular about trains as well that always seem to be, there always seems to be some sort of jeopardy on a train. You rarely get like, pleasant train journeys in films, aside from something like Before Sunrise. Like, it's always someone's trapped on a train, or they're being compelled to go forwards, or there's a killer on the train, or a bomb on the train. Like, a bad thing is being transported by a train. Like, trains aren't they're a source of danger in films always. And there's something also about framing a train and having that kind of forced perspective down the train, and people coming backwards and forwards and being forced to interact when they meet in the middle, because there's no space between them as well. It brings everybody closer and doesn't give them anywhere to run to. They can retreat, but only for so long.
It's really interesting as well, imagining how that stuff on the train was shot, because Ritchie tells a story in the book about how I don't even think I've mentioned it this time what book I'm talking about. There's Donald Ritchie's The Film of Akira Kurosawa, which is this kind of big text for Kurosawa books. But anyway, he mentions a story about the making of High and Low, where he was on the set one day watching it being made, and it was at the house on the mount, at the house on the hill, the Kingo Gondo mansion house, and they were doing rehearsals, and they were blocking it all out, because there's this immaculate blocking in these movies, and they were doing these like long takes, but they were doing rehearsals of these kind of unbroken 10-minute scenes. And there was a bit where Mifune pulled the curtain back, and a light bulb had blown that was supposed to be the outside world, and because it was a set, and the light bulb had gone, and rather than just carry on and go, well, it's only a rehearsal, they'll fix that later, Kurosawa stopped all the rehearsals and waited for the light bulb to be fixed, because he wanted it all done properly, which, if you've even worked on a small film or visited a tiny film set, is just an awful waste of time.
And money.
And money, right? It's just a terrible thing to do. It's a bad idea. It's a very stupid thing to do. But that's how meticulous Kurosawa is. Now, if you bear in mind that the bit on the train seems to actually be shot on an actual train, doing an actual journey on a railway track, which, is difficult to like block and reverse, and, you can't really stop on it. And he's covering it with all these different cameras because all of those... well, I'll put a pin in that. I'll come back to that. But he's covering it with all these different cameras. Unless he somehow did this one in one take, I feel like Kurosawa was probably really taking the piss on that train line that day. You know what I mean? I feel like if the light bulb situation has anything to do with it, because it's so precise. The thing I was going to say about the cameras is Richie mentions that all of the photography that happens, all of the kind of, is it 8mm, the smaller cameras?
Yeah.
Like 8mm, and all the photography was also done in real time by cameras placed on that train during that journey. And I really appreciate that, because one of my pet peeves in all of movies is, and you'll have seen this a million times in a million movies, but when like in a movie, they'll look at security camera footage or something like that, or tape recording from the scene, and it's just the scene as we've seen it as an audience, built on the proper professional cameras. I absolutely hate that. So the fact that all of the footage the police are looking at is not only like photography and 8mm footage, but it's the footage they actually took while filming the other stuff. I love that. I love that a lot. But it's you realize when you start thinking about that, because you think, well, okay, this one can't have been that expensive because it's like set in kind of the modern world and it's not all these castles and samurais and costumes and horses. But then you think about Kurosawa fucking filming this thing on a train.
But also, like, you can, once you get into the second half, you can see how big the cast is.
Yes.
You see how many locations are involved.
Yep.
You can see how complicated that shooting schedule must be. Like, a lot of money's gone into this.
Exactly.
There's so many extras, so many locations. Like, there's no, and shot in busy. I don't know what permissions used to be like and how you used to have to kind of close things down or not. I would imagine they would have had to have closed down that railway line for at least a day or two and pay for all of that. It's quite an expansive film, really, even though you don't think it's going to be at the beginning. I will say it could start better.
Yeah. Well, it starts with the shoe conversation, doesn't it?
Yeah. And I love the name. I love the name of the company, National Shoes.
National Shoes. Yeah. I love. There's a.
Which is kind of, that's a recurring motif as well, isn't it? Like, things are called like the National Shoe or the Cake Company or whatever. Like, he's not one for making up a corporate name, Kurosawa.
No, there's a comic book podcast I used to listen to called House to Astonish, and they used to refer to a certain type of dialogue, like overly expository, unnatural dialogue, as they used to call it, "As you know, my father the king" type dialogue. And there's a lot of "as you know, my father the king" at the beginning, because there's a bit where the guy says like, "Well, as you know, we are the three big shareholders on the board, and you are the manager of the factory." And it's sort of like, that's not how you talk to people. That's very strange. So yeah, that is slightly clunky, that opening scene. I'll give it that.
It recovers quickly, but it definitely comes out of the door fumbling. It's like, don't know if we've got any other Arsenal fans who watch this, but it's like it's like a fluff back pass to Leno at the start of kickoff. Doesn't quite lead to an own goal, but very almost could have done, and kind of shakes things for a little bit afterwards.
Excellent. So another thing, like you're probably better placed to answer this as a film teacher, so I'm putting you on the spot here. But like, this film does the Schindler's List thing of having the bit of color in a black and white film, right? It has the pink smoke coming out the chimney. I'm not aware of how experimental or different that was to be doing here. Like, what is the kind of history and lineage of using bits of color in black and white movies? When would that have been? Would that be weird for 1963, or is that kind of?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, you've got films, obviously, famously, Wizard of Oz is using both in the 30s. I don't know where I've seen the kind of
where like it's an entirely black and white film with an isolated bit of color.
I don't know. That is a bit that's not quite in my film history. Actually, I
'Cause
know
it's-
how I know the kind of I know how you'd go about doing it digitally, and I guess it wouldn't be that much different doing it in a photochemical process. But yeah, no, I've not seen it before. No.
It's interesting, and especially given that, as I've talked about in previous episodes,
Oh,
Spielberg is a big fan of Kurosawa as well. So
that
who
said,
knows?
you would get quite a lot of sort of tinted films before then, wouldn't you? You would
Hmm.
get like Abel Gant's Napoleon films had tints on different different parts of the film were tinted differently, and lots of other early silent films had color tints.
Yeah, I
on
mean,
them.
Birth of a Nation and Intolerance and stuff do all that,
Yeah.
don't they? But in terms of isolating one element in a black and white film and having that be color, and I just wondered, like I was saying, like I know Spielberg's a big fan of Kurosawa. He produced Dreams, which is one of the later ones, and he's spoken a lot of documentaries about how much he liked Kurosawa. So I wonder if this was a seed for that part of Schindler's List, or I wonder if there's just a big history of this happening, because I don't know too many other examples of it. But it's interesting anyway, and it's Kurosawa's.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about it. It's one of those things that there's quite a lot of things that for the longest time weren't possible at low budget filmmaking. That suddenly became possible like post 2008, really. Maybe going back a little bit earlier, but like the big thing was always depth of field. Like you can't get shallow depth of field on or it's really difficult to, at least on a video camera. And then people started being able to shoot on DSLRs, and they had proper glass to do it. And so all of a sudden, everybody who was shooting at a low level, like not even necessarily making full short, but anyone who was like a hobbyist or learning, everything was that really narrow depth of field. And then when there was sort of some improvements in chroma keying, or the sort of chroma keying algorithms really in Final Cut and Premiere and that kind of thing, but it became much easier to get a acceptable key out of that. Then one of the done things for a little while became to do that Schindler's List style isolating colors. So you'd see loads of people doing it over and over again. It's kind of died down a little bit, but that's where my mind jumps to, and I hadn't actually thought about it being prior to Spielberg, but it must be. There must be bits and pieces.
There must be others as well. But it's,
and I'm
it's
sure
interesting.
I'm sure there's stuff we'd know if it occurred to us as well. But
yeah, quite probably. I think as well, though, it's it's interesting as well because it's Kurosawa's first fleeting use of color as well, as this is his penultimate black and white film. So he's getting there. Most of Japanese cinema at this point is rapidly kind of becoming color. So he is behind the curve on that one. So any other closing thoughts?
Well, what I got in my notes, I put something about durable. Oh, that's to do with the
shoes.
Shoes, yeah. We've discussed this. The shoes, the curtain business, soap opera. Oh, it was a question for you, really. And this is probably not a great insight into the film. It's more about transfers and image quality. I take it you watched it on the Criterion channel.
I did.
And was it like a remaster? Was it 1080 or?
Yeah, I guess so. It looked really nice. I'm terrible at that kind of thing. It looked really good.
It was I only noticed it at the beginning, and I think it sorted itself out. But the early scenes actually were a little bit washed and a little bit out of focus. And there
are a few bits in it where it seems like the I don't know how to talk about this in a technical way, but where it's like too bright and the whites kind of bleed into the light. I noticed that a few times. Yeah, I don't know if that's a remastering thing or
It's only in the early scenes, and it looks lovely after that. But in the very early scenes, maybe it's partly to do with the fact that the durability of the shoes is so uninteresting.
You were looking.
Yeah, but that kind of quickly went away. But I was just only interested because I was watching it on BFI player, and the highest resolution they had for some reason was SD. So I was wondering if there was a better remaster that I'd missed out on, and maybe I should have watched it on Criterion Channel.
It is out on Blu-ray, so I think the Criterion Collection channel version is probably based on that. But I really don't know that kind of thing. It wasn't SD though; it was definitely HD. But anyway, one thing I'll mention, and this is really just trivia. It's not really a great insight, but one thing I read in the Ritchie that was interesting was that Kurosawa, again wasting money, being rubbish at money. He built Kingo Gondo's house twice because they built it on the hill for using it for the exteriors, like looking out the windows and being on the balcony, but he didn't like the way that photographed for the interiors with the curtains closed. So they also built the whole thing as a set. So there's more just faffing around. Not quite as bad as that Tarkovsky film where he just burnt that house down and didn't record it and then had to build the house again. Or the other Tarkovsky film where he filmed it 3 times with 3 different cinematographers. Anyway, a lot of these guys, you can't trust them with money.
Oh, just another quick shout out to the really great scene where the detectives are on the case trying to track down the house where the kidnappers have been hiding out, and then at the same time the kidnapped child who's since been returned, and his father's driving him around asking him what he remembers, and there's this really great kind of intercut scene between the two cars, and they get to the house, and there's a little bit of tension as to whether or not. That's one of the things I like about it is really liked about the film was like it's not just the melodrama, but it avoids the scene where the kidnappers see the kid and run, and there's a shootout, and there's the kids. Do you know what I mean? It avoids
like cheap sort of drama at all costs.
Yeah,
it doesn't really ever do that. You kind of expect, because it flirts with it a few times, because you think, oh, the kid's going to get in trouble. Like there's a bit where the bit you talked about where they're looking for evidence, and the kid disappears, and he's gone for like a second before he shouts and they see him again. So there's a moment there. There's a moment later on where the police can see that the kidnappers coincidentally bumped into Kingo Gondo on the street, where they're just kind of walking by each other, and there could be some sort of flash there could be some kind of interaction, but it doesn't happen. So there are those moments where it could go that way and it chooses not to, and like you say, there is never that gunfight or anything. Talking about the bit you said with the cars, echoing what I said about the trains, about that kind of the movement of being on a train. But I watched Gun Crazy the other day, and Gun Crazy has this amazing sequence in it where it's all one take. It's a big oneer, but they turn up in a car, do a bank robbery, and then drive off in that car, and the camera stays in the car the whole time. It has a few different sort of setups where it kind of pushes and watches out the window as she goes out and talks to a policeman, and then it kind of has a dramatic sort of pushing like close up on her at one point as she's looking at the back, but it's all kind of within the car, and you get to see this small town out of all the windows around the side and everything. You can see that they're actually in this place and going around this location, and it just gives the thing so much presence and weight, more than you'd get if it was one of those standard like back projected sort of car journeys in one of those films. And I think that's really nice in High and Low as well, because those bits you're talking about with the guy's driving his son around and the cops are driving around, it really is all this just really great on location stuff, isn't it? You're kind of getting a little virtual tour of Yokohama in 1962 or whenever they would have filmed it, and it's really, really I love that stuff. And that's why when you talk about, well, where do you cut the 20 minutes, is because there are bits like that where there probably is non-essential business going on, but it's all just such nice non-essential business. Do you know what I mean?
I mean, this film's a treat.
Yeah, it really is. It's a very good one. I wasn't sure watching it again, because I am one of those hipsters who says this is their favorite Kurosawa film. Watching it again yesterday, I'm not sure whether I actually think it's better than Seven Samurai. I'm up in the air on that. And actually, so far, on this rewatch of all of the films, the one that's impressed me the most, the one that's kind of gained the most esteem in my eyes, is probably The Bad Sleep Well. Actually, that's probably climbed the highest. But yeah, it's a jolly good film.
I've watched a couple of Carol Reed films since we watched that as well. I'd already, I'd seen The Third Man, but I've watched. I can't remember what they both. One of them was Odd Man Out, and they made me think of High and Low, kind of, especially the latter part of it where he's on the run. That's still that High and Low, Bad Sleep Well. Yeah, that's still that's still kind of playing in my thoughts as I'm rewatching a lot of kind of noir films, and especially these Carol Reed films. So it's sticking with me.
That's interesting. So based on kind of a spin-off of that, there's always the part of the episode where we talk about where your ranking goes on a graph I actually call High and Low. So where in the High and Low graph does High and Low go? On the axis of enjoyment versus appreciation, we do have very cluttered top right. On the enjoyment and appreciation scale, you've got The Bad Sleep Well is basically the pinnacle. That is the one that you've got.
I don't know. Just chuck it in the middle of all of them. Like, like it's getting to the point where
it's a bit silly.
It's getting a bit silly, and like on any given day, they will just kind of. I imagine it as kind of like a little rotating circle, like something you'd see on Play School or or Sesame Street. Just rotating circle of colours, but it's up there. It's really, really good.
But given Kurosawa's reputation among sort of Western critics and audiences is all about samurai and the samurai films, I feel like your equivalent of High and Low being your favourite is just that your favourite ones are the contemporary crime films.
Definitely, yeah. That'll be my annoying wanker at the party. He gets a lot of credit for his samurai films, but actually,
exactly. Yeah. Do you like your Jimbo, Craig? It's all right. Have you seen The Bad Sleep Well? Exactly. So next time around, we're looking at his final black and white film, the final film from his kind of golden era. Basically, he has a lot of trouble after this one getting anything else made for a long time, and in fact, he has health problems. He has a suicide attempt. There's questions over whether he'll even ever make another film after this one. But his next film is Redbeard. His final work as well with Toshiro Mifune. So it really is the end of an era in so many ways. What are your expectations for Redbeard, if you have any?
No, not a lot. It says here, episodic poignant story of a 19th century doctor working in a clinic for the poor and his tumultuous friendship with a young intern. It sounds like a period version of like Drunken Angel and The Silent Jewel, The Quiet Jewel. It also says it's 3 hours long.
It's a long one. I've only seen this one once, and that was so long ago. So I really am coming to this fairly fresh as well. So it'll be interesting.
I don't know what to expect from this. I quite like the idea of watching a period set one that isn't samurais and swords. So I'm hoping there's not a lot of that snuck in as well. I'd like to see this. I'd like to see something that's maybe deals in the kind of like the world of the lower depths, but it's a bit more expansive than
I think that's a decent way of putting it based on what I remember. I'm looking forward to that one. This is one that seems to now be turning out. I think it's going to be the next High and Low. I think the way that gentrification works, where they'll do up a certain area of town, but the next one's the current dirty area. They're going to go and gentrify that next time. I feel like Redbeard is tomorrow's High and Low, because I keep seeing it pop up in all these lists now, and I keep seeing you watch like the Criterion Closet where directors go in and pick up their favorite film. Increasingly I'm seeing Redbeard make appearances in these sorts of things, so interesting. I think it could be I think it's the next up and coming area. Redbeard.
And to be perfectly honest with you, I think as we kind of really hurtle towards the end of all this, because we've got about 6 or 7 left after this one.
Yeah, not that many.
And then, there's the 70s kind of color ones that I had no idea that existed really. I have to say that I think there's 2 more coming that I actually was aware of, and that is Ran and
Kamusha.
Dreams. Well, maybe
Okay.
3. I did know Kagamusha, but I didn't know. I knew the name, and I assumed it was another black and white one. To be honest, yeah. So Kagamusha's in there as well, but I really feel like I'm kind of entering the next phase of this podcast almost completely blind.
Excellent. Okay, well,
and I'm really not looking forward to Dreams. Film version of his dreams, which just
one of them stars Martin Scorsese as Vincent Van Gogh. So you've got that to look forward to. All right then. Well, on that bombshell, we'll see you again next time to discuss Redbeard. In the meantime, I've been Rob Beams, joined by Craig Ennis, and have a good one.